Hi, we are Team ZZZ, and today we would like to talk to you about characteristics of successful and effective leaders. We will start off by discussing what leadership is and how different leaders describe it. Then we will focus on the characteristics that are essential to make a successful and effective leader. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of leadership? Leadership is a very broad topic and could be described in probably 100 different ways. Passion, discipline, motivation, excellence, or dedication. These are just a few of the traits that come to mind. We decided to ask some of the successful leaders we know about what leadership means to them.
Could you tell me what your definition of leadership is?
Leadership is having those kinds of qualities so that you can get people to believe in what you're trying to do, so that they'll follow you, so that they'll try to do what you want them to do, and they'll do it with vigor.
I think leadership is the ability of the leader to guide a group to achieve things they could not have done on their own. So basically, they crowd the best of people that maybe even they didn't think they could achieve.
我认为，什么是领导能力？我认为领导能力是吸引和调动员工，让他们把才能运用到工作中，从而达到团队目标的一种艺术。这种能力需要在日积月累的实践中得到，而不是单单可以从书中获取的。
która motywuje, która jest inspirująca, być takim role model w pewnym sensie, a także z drugiej strony bycie przyjacielem, tak, bycie kimś takim, do którego ludzie będą mogli zawsze zagadać, zapytać o coś i będą się bali nigdy podejść, czyli to jest taka
There are undoubtedly many consistent characteristics and traits of successful and effective leaders. After reviewing many scholarly and business articles, while also interviewing a few people, we have gained insight on the characteristics that a successful leader must have. As we researched, themes emerged and proved to be consistent amongst our findings. The most significant goal of successful leaders is to instill trust and cohesion in the groups they are leading. If the leader is able to develop healthy relationships with his subordinates, then the group is much more likely to perform at a higher level. Traits of historical leaders, as well as our interviews, support our findings. Now let's review the most important traits of successful leaders.
In order to develop trust and cohesion in a group, a leader must gain the respect of his subordinates. One of the most common attributes in a leader is confidence. The leader must exude confidence to his subordinates so that they do not second-guess the leader's decisions. I interviewed my father, Dan Concessi, who was a U.S. Marine during the Vietnam War and is currently employed as a civil engineer. Here he talks about the importance of confidence in a leadership role.
Exude confidence so the people that are subordinate to him will, have the confidence that they'll know that what they're doing is the right thing.
Okay.
That's especially true. It's even more true with military leaders.
In order to influence subordinates to be courageous enough to make decisions, a leader must have great relationships with his subordinates. As described by Maggie Worrell in her Forbes article about leadership, leaders must be vulnerable in order to get on the same level as their subordinates for the sake of developing meaningful relationships with them. She describes relationships as the currency of the workplace. By this she means people will be far more ready to go the extra mile for leaders they can relate to on a human level, rather than someone whom they perceive thinks of themselves as a little bit better than everybody else. The reason relationships are so important is because stronger relationships inherently instill trust. Dan Concessi described the most effective military leader as a leader that his men had a special affection for, and they knew that whatever decision he was going to make was going to be the correct one.
And he promised them before they even left the United States, he'd be the first one to put his boot on the ground and the last one to take his boot off the ground, and he kept that promise.
It is also very important that a leader lead by example. Although charisma can help, it is also true that leaders can be quiet. These types of leaders set a very high standard in their group and personify the type of person each individual has to be in order for the group to perform at the highest possible level. In the Forbes article, How Do Introverted Leaders Succeed?, Carl Moore describes how Saku Koivu, the longtime captain of the successful Montreal Canadiens, was met with so much success. Despite the fact that Koivu had a very quiet and shy demeanor, he personified the qualities perfectly that the Canadiens needed to be successful. His teammates respected him immensely as a result of his lead-by-example leadership style.
Here's on net, spinning in front, going with a hair score! What a goal by the Canadian captain! Inspiration is one thing. When you come out and play a game like this, in a key situation, your first home playoff game in 4 years, and you make plays like this, it goes well beyond anything I can describe right now.
The way that a leader carries himself is important when developing cohesion in a group. The most important thing to remember when leading any type of group is to act with virtue rather than values. This is because values are inconsistent among different cultures, yet it is known that virtuous acts are deemed positive in all cultures. Virtuous traits include, but are not limited to, kindness, honesty, and respectability. According to Thomas Kelly's article, Effective Leaders Are Ethical Leaders, you must act with virtue in order for your group to trust you, because virtuous acts are, without exception, always good.
Flexibility is necessary, as more often than not, each project you will be working on will be comprised of a different group of people, and so you need to understand how certain people work and what their strengths are, so you can use the most effective approach to reach out to them.
Another critical characteristic of a successful leader is one who has a strong emotional intelligence quotient. One interviewee believes that having a strong EQ makes for a good leader.
And they also have a strong EQ or emotional quotient. You know, there's IQ, which is intelligence, but EQ is the ability to really understand and have empathy and really know what people need. Different people need different things. Some people need maybe a lot of encouragement and support. Maybe others need to be challenged. So good leaders are able to be very situational in their approach.
The Journal of Leadership Studies states that leaders with a strong EQ are able to make informed, well thought out decisions that take into account what others think of them. Being a visionary is an important part of being a successful leader. Not only do leaders need to have a vision for their team, but they need to be able to communicate it clearly, so that all members of the group are fully aware of how they are going to achieve that vision. According to the Journal of Leadership Studies, effective leaders should be able to influence others to do their best and want to follow their vision.
Another characteristic of successful leader is knowledgeable. Respected leaders are constantly studying and looking for ways to improve. It is much easier for people to trust someone who are knowledgeable. To be knowledgeable, leaders must have a large range of information and knowledge at their disposal. One of our interviewees, Wen Chen, said, "I only have a middle school diploma, so I feel my knowledge of management is limited, which will affect the development of my company. So I joined many entrepreneurs clubs and went to many lectures to gain experience as much as I can. I think a knowledgeable leader will be respected by his subordinates and solve the problem easily." To be a good leader, you have to be a great listener. Listening means you are taking their point of view into account and truly considering what they have to say. It is important to not just lend an ear to a fellow co-worker or employee, but to also set aside time to interact with them and get to know who you are working with. One of our interviewees, Wen Chen, said, "Before making decisions, I always spend lots of time on listening employees or shareholders' feedback, providing one-on-one communication with group members, ensure that group members feel able to make contributions and receive recognition for their achievements.
Taking action. While a good leader will inspire their subordinates to accomplish great things before the work even begins, it is necessary that the leader follows up the inspiration with taking action on behalf of the group. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke very highly of John F. Kennedy for following through on his oration on civil rights by campaigning for potentially unpopular legislation in Congress. While previous presidents had spoken of expanding civil rights across racial lines, often these words would come to nothing against the possibility of losing votes. Kennedy inspired a generation of young Americans to personally get involved in expanding civil rights legislation in the face of violence and protests by taking the first step toward getting the legislation passed. Developing a strong character. Effective leaders develop certain essential character traits necessary to their own success. Specifically, a leader must develop a strong sense of ambition combined with high levels of self-efficacy. It is the leader's strong desire to accomplish goals combined with their self-assurance that they are very capable of accomplishing those goals that causes a leader's high level of accomplishment. A leader must also develop a strong understanding of their own interpersonal style and build their relationships around that standard. Not every leader is expected to be an introvert or a people person, but a good leader must know how they best deal with people and use that method of interaction to its fullest effect. President Bill Clinton demonstrates these character traits strongly because his personal style of communicating directly with voters, combined with a strong work ethic, to make him one of the youngest presidents in American history. Understanding the people. A leader has to understand the individual wants and needs of a group and put those desires into a common stated goal. Though each member of the group may know what they want themselves, the leader is the one who translates those into a single message. Individuals are often wary of cooperating with others whose intentions are unclear, but an effective leader will persuade every member of a group that working towards a common goal will make each individual personally better off. Stated otherwise, a leader will convince others that working towards the good of the group is also working towards individual good. President Woodrow Wilson pursued these theories of leadership as his term saw World War I break out in Europe and the United States' involvement several years later. The American public initially opposed the war greatly, and even after American ships came under attack, isolationist pressures strongly resisted entering the war. Wilson cast joining the Allied war effort as necessary to protect North America instead of a far-off waste of lives and resources. Knowing the limits. A good leader should question any limits placed on a group. There are times the leader cannot get around a limitation, or a situation is outside of the leader's control. In those situations, a leader should be able to do one of two things: know how to work around a limitation and find a new way to bring success to the group, or create a long-term plan where those limitations can be challenged. In American presidential history, John F. Kennedy was an example of the former type of leader. He recognized that campaigning for civil rights legislation could harm his popularity, so he worked through existing power structures in Congress to pass his agenda. On the other hand, Ronald Reagan was an example of the latter type of leader, because he campaigned on a new position of republicanism that brought him significant personal popularity and allowed him to push his own agenda against an opposing Congress.
Dan Concessi was able to speak on behalf of the Marine Corps when talking about his leadership experience. Throughout our interview, it was clear that trust was absolutely crucial when military leaders are instructing their men. Death could be the consequence if the subordinates second-guess the decision of their leader for even a split second. I asked him about the most effective leader he had ever encountered while in the military.
Right, so what makes him the most effective leader is basically how much his subordinates trusted him. Would you say that?
Oh, absolutely. In a situation like that where you're asking somebody to put their life on the line, they have to have confidence that their leadership knows what they're doing.
It is also important to note that the military relies heavily on leaders at a very low level as team leaders rather than organizational leaders. To conclude my findings, a military leader is met with success if he personifies similar characteristics to what we have described before. Yet it is even more important that a leader is confident, qualified, and has great judgment, because at the end of the day, the men below him are fully trusting him with their lives. In conclusion, there are many different ways to be a successful and effective leader. As long as you are able to maintain trust and cohesion within your group, you will be able to lead them effectively. Whether you be charismatic or the quietest of leaders, your effectiveness will be measured by how much your subordinates believe in you. The scholarly and business articles we have done our research through have given us reliable insight on how to conduct yourself as a leader, and we hope you will be able to use this information to better your own leadership skills. On behalf of Team ZZZ, I thank you for listening, and I hope we have presented you with helpful insight into what it takes to be an effective leader.